Welcome to Villains Month here on Dave Knows Wrestling, where we're celebrating the bad guys all month long of pro wrestling. I was going to call it Heels Month, but that sounds like I'm running a shoe special. So to kick things off, I think we need to start at the beginning. Now, I've briefly touched upon the origins of heels in the past, but today I want to really get into things. And now, professional wrestling heels have been around for a long time, but I specifically want to focus on the first wrestler to do all the treacherous things that we associate with being a heel today. Who is that wrestler? Well, he's the subject of this episode, because today, Dave knows Gorgeous George. George Raymond Wagner was born on March 24, 1915 in Butte, Nebraska, and he came from a farming family that moved all across the country until his parents finally decided to settle down in Houston, Texas. And surprisingly, as a youth, Gorgeous George was known for being associated with a rough crowd and being a bit of a tough guy himself. Then at age 14, George would actually drop out of school, and he would begin working odd jobs in order to help support his family. And on top of that, he would actually go to local carnivals and wrestle in amateur wrestling matches. And he was pretty good too, because he would eventually capture the Northwest Middleweight crown and the Pacific Coast Light Heavyweight Championship. But unfortunately, this is where his success would stop for a little while. At 5 foot 9 inches tall and 215 pounds, George didn't exactly have the most intimidating stature, and he wasn't the greatest athlete all around. He was just a solid wrestler. But sadly, solid isn't enough to get you over with the professional wrestling circuit, and if you couldn't draw a crowd, promoters really had little reason to book you. But this would all change when George met a movie theater cashier named Betty Hansen. The two eventually got married, and they did so in the middle of a wrestling ring. And this became the first thing that George ever did that got him some real attention in the business. And this routine was just so popular that they actually ended up repeating it in several different venues. So I guess Gorgeous George is the one I have to thank for all these wrestling weddings I have to put up with now. Thanks a lot, George. Now after this fizzled out, George went right back to being underbooked again. But his wife wouldn't let him quit. She supported her man so much that she actually made him a beautiful robe to wear down to the ring like a prize fighter. Now George was so proud of this robe that his wife lovingly made for him that he wanted to take special care of it. So during his first bout with the robe, he actually took it off very carefully and delicately folded it. Now, he actually took so long with this that the crowd actually started to boo him for it. After all, they came to see a wrestling match, not some ninny folding his laundry. Now, this reaction made Betty angry, and she actually jumped into the crowd and slapped the heckler on George's behalf. This made George mad, and George jumped into the crowd and decided he was going to punch the heckler himself. And after that, the whole place went ballistic. Now, following that, while some people would see a catastrophe, George actually saw opportunity. So the following week, he decided to take even longer folding his robe, and he antagonized the crowd even more. And this process would just get worse and worse as time went on, but make no bones about it, George had finally found his calling. Now you see, heels in professional wrestling most certainly did exist, but they weren't the preening over-the-top egomaniacs that so many heels have become ever since. Mostly they were just dirty or ugly, but all that was about to change. So inspired by how much hatred he got simply for folding a robe, and by fellow wrestler Lord Patrick Lansdowne, George was about to become wrestling's first truly great heel. And now as for the name, well, during his entrance one night, he heard a woman say, "Oh, isn't he gorgeous?" And the word stuck out to George, and right then and there he knew that he had found a name for his brand new wrestling persona, Gorgeous George. Now, George would spend the next several years perfecting his gimmick, and keep in mind, this is right after World War II, where a lot of Americans were against anything that was viewed as snooty and European. And on top of that, many vets had very distinct ideas in their head of what made a man, and were pretty angry about anything that was to the contrary, which is a fact that most certainly did not escape George. And so George's gimmick would continue to evolve. He got even more robes and even gaudier outfits, more lace, more sequins, more everything. He began curling and bleaching his hair and holding it in place with golden bobby pins, which he referred to as Georgie pins. And then when he was about to come out to the arena, he would have the lights dim and he would have the loudspeakers playing Pomp and Circumstance. That's right, the same song as the Macho Man. Where do you think Randy Savage got it from? Weird, because Macho actually dated a girl he called Gorgeous George, so that's pretty interesting. And then on his way to the ring, all kinds of things could happen. He could enter on a trapeze, he could have his own personal red carpet, he could even have people throwing rose petals at his feet. His entrances just got more and more elaborate, sometimes even taking longer than the matches themselves. Oh, and he also had valets escorting him everywhere like he was royalty. They would even spray down the smelly Mad and the smelly opponent, and even the smelly referee with Chanel number 5, which he called Chanel number 10 because, in his words, why be half safe? And then when he was actually in the ring and the referee would pat him down to check for weapons, that's when George would say his famous phrase, "Get your filthy hands off me!" And the rest most certainly had good reasons to check him too, because as George would put it, win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat. Ooh, and cheat he did, because George would use every dirty heel tactic in the book. Eye gouges, back rakes, low blows, anything you could think of. George was always constantly preening. He would gloat if he was winning, he would whine if he was losing, and on top of that he would lose his mind crying if anyone touched his hair. And they did, every single match. This was a routine, day in and day out, and yet no one ever got sick of it. That's what they came to see. George would do everything to infuriate the crowd, and as much as they hated him, they also loved it at the same time. George just drew bigger and bigger crowds, being the first wrestler that fans truly loved to hate. And as successful as he was, George was about to hit even new heights on November 11th, 1947, because that's when Gorgeous George made his television debut. In the beginning of TV, television was desperate to get anything on air that was entertaining but also cheap to produce. If you think about it, pro wrestling was TV gold for this era. Unlike a large baseball field or a football field, a wrestling ring is relatively small by comparison, therefore making it easy to film and therefore making it cheap to produce. Now the only thing missing here was that people needed to watch, and Gorgeous George made sure that that happened. Gorgeous George, along with Bob Hope, Milton Berle, and Lucille Ball, became the reasons why many people bought a television set in the first place. And thanks to George, wrestling began airing every single night of the week. And in addition, George's television theatrics actually got to draw even bigger live crowds in person, thus improving attendance sales. George just ended up succeeding in every possible aspect of the business. And going forward from this, George's influence would spread. Many of pop culture's biggest figures would actually be inspired by George to create their own persona, modeled after his. Little Richard, Liberace, and even Muhammad Ali all took their cue from Gorgeous George. In fact, Muhammad Ali, who is no stranger to the world of professional wrestling himself and has served as inspiration for many wrestlers, actually got his start thanks to a meeting he had with Gorgeous George. The two met in 1961 on a Las Vegas radio show, and it was that moment that a young up-and-coming boxer named Cassius Clay would be changed forever. And to quote the man himself, "That's when I decided. I'd never been shy about talking, but if I talked even more, there was no telling how much people would pay to see me." So now that it's all said and done, over-the-top characters, over-the-top theatrics, dirty heel tactics, television, celebrities, promos, entrances, and so many aspects of not just pro wrestling culture, but also pop culture in general, all owe a tremendous debt to George Wagner, aka Gorgeous George. And that concludes my tribute to Gorgeous George. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and this has been Dave Knows.